The crazy stuff sells. If I pumped a bunch of steroids and started lifting logs and looked like a maniac out in the woods, people would probably watch my stuff and they would probably apply it. They may not completely trust me, but they'd probably apply it. You don't have to look like a maniac. You don't have to go lift logs in the forest. I know that stuff gets attention, but that's not like the true ancestral way. Like, come on. Okay, we're gonna hop in our air-conditioned vehicles, we're gonna drive and get a vanilla latte, and then we're gonna go back and pretend that we're living an ancestral lifestyle. Look, if I pumped myself up full of a bunch of steroids or something and went out into the forest and lifted rocks and took videos of it, it would probably get attention and people might even apply it. But that's not realistic long term. So I have 12 ancestral habits that you can follow that actually work when it comes down to fat loss, visceral fat reduction, even brain function, and just feeling good that aren't going to make you a complete weirdo. So what are your thoughts on the whole ancestral thing? Like, do you think there's merit to it? Do you think the people on the internet kind of ruin it? Do you think there's no logic to it? Drop a comment down below. Let me know. I really am curious. It also helps the algorithm. I want some good engagement. I want to hear what you have to say. And also, we have videos come out every single day, so hit that subscribe button. So let's just jump right in. Number one, occasional grounding. There is legit science to this. And you might turn off the video thinking I've lost my mind when I talk about just putting your bare feet on the earth or the grass. But the fact of the matter is that the science is there. And I've done full videos on this. There's a few studies, actually a lot of randomized control studies that demonstrate that you do get a beneficial effect. The main thing that happens is it changes red blood cell aggregation. So you actually have a thinning of the blood, so you get more blood flow when your feet are connected to the earth. Sounds crazy, but we've just become so far removed from it. But do you need to walk around the forest barefoot like a weirdo? No, most of the literature suggests that like just 10, 15, 20 minutes of just being barefoot out on the earth or out in the grass can have a positive effect. The next one is number 2, and that's getting sunlight or red light. Okay, now you're thinking, okay, this is the most vanilla, boring video ever. Look, no, you can get as weird as you want to with it. And again, I've done videos talking about the anti-inflammatory effects of sunlight. These are things that, quite frankly, don't get talked about enough. One thing that I discovered that's really interesting is that on our skin, we have these nitric oxide components. We actually have these nitrate compounds. And what happens is when the sun, the UVB and blue light from the sun hits them, it shakes them up a little bit and actually turns them into nitric oxide. Okay, that's NO2. We take NO2 supplements to get a better pump when we go to the gym. This NO2 then potentially has anti-inflammatory effects, but of course has blood flow effects. So standing outside with your feet on the grass, your feet on the earth, looking at some sunlight and getting sun on your skin, wow, who would have thought that that actually has a positive impact? It's pretty darn cool. But the reality is you don't need to be shirtless lifting logs in the forest or pulling crazy sleds. You can just be a normal person and go in your backyard and hang out and make a phone call being barefoot on the grass for a little bit in the sun. Okay, number 3, this is a really interesting one because it gets into sort of the fundamentals of how humans were supposed to move. Okay. Sitting in this gray area of high aerobic work is seemingly abnormal in some ways. It seems as though when you look at some of the anthropological data that we were either moving over long distances, carrying loads over long domains, okay, sort of that zone 1, zone 2 work, or we were sprinting in like zone 4, zone 5, like we were really going for it. So I'm not suggesting that everyone goes out and sprints, but it does make sense. And I had Dr. Sean O'Mara on my channel not that long ago, and we were talking about how this makes a big impact on like visceral fat reduction. And when you look at like the old anthropology studies where they actually ran old human remains through MRIs and they studied these things, and when we look at wild animals, we see, well, they don't eat processed foods and they have these periods of sprinting and they have no visceral fat. So what's going on there? Well, we can only speculate, but we can look at some of the newer data and understand that it really is sprinting in these short periods of time that has a positive impact on metabolic rates and all kinds of things. So what does that mean for you? Because not everyone can go out and sprint. What I would recommend is put a treadmill on an incline and sprint on an incline. That way you're not having this like extra length you have to travel where you're going to risk hurting a hamstring or just injuring yourself in the first place. Sprinting uphill is very safe for most people. So if you're active, if you're somewhat healthy, you could probably sprint uphill and simulate this. Now the other side of this is number 4, walking. Okay. Our ancestors would walk and cover long domains. In fact, a lot of the ancestral evidence that we do have shows that we would probably hunt our prey over long periods of time. I remember Dr. Jacob Torres, he's a kidney researcher, but he came on my channel and he was telling me before we were filming, he was like, you know what makes humans unique is that we have the ability to sweat and handle long distances where we would kind of hunt down our prey until they would get tired. Sometimes it would be a slow jog. Sometimes it would just be walking because we could sweat, we could handle the heat, and we could go for a long period of time. Now, again, realistically, no one today was alive back then, so we can't say for absolute certain, but it makes some logical sense here, right? We cover long distances, so we walk a lot. That is a very ancestral thing that you could do. That doesn't make you a complete weirdo. If you go out and you throw a rucksack on and you go walk a couple miles in the morning, and then occasionally you go do some sprinting. Now, this next one might irritate some people because people don't always agree with this because a lot of the newer evidence-based stuff says, hey, like, you know, you can kind of eat whatever you want. No particular diet pattern would work, but I am still a believer. And I believe in my heart and in my soul that we are designed to have random periods of time without food and random boluses. So what I mean by that is fractal eating, okay? So I believe that our ancestors, and it would just make logical, biological sense that we would go long periods of time without food, and then we would have a large surplus of food. And then we might go a short period of time without food, and then a long period, and then a medium period. We don't need to gamify everything to a certain time. One of the most ancestral, realistic things that you could do is just not be so dang rigid about the times that you eat. Sometimes eat breakfast, sometimes skip it. Sometimes skip lunch. Heaven forbid you skip dinner. Just because it's not normal in society doesn't mean that it's unhealthy or healthy. It's just sometimes we should skip dinner. If you're not hungry, don't eat. Treat yourself as if food wasn't available 24/7. And maybe you'd have to work hard and then you'd get a large bolus, especially with protein, because we're seeing now with the newer evidence that you can handle large boluses of protein at once. It may take longer to digest, but if you got 100 grams of protein or 200 grams of protein in, chances are you would utilize all of it. It just might take longer to digest, which makes sense. If you hunted down prey and you got 200 or 300 grams of protein and you scarfed it down in one sitting until you were full, and then you didn't get an opportunity to eat again for another 24 hours or 48 hours, yeah, that protein didn't go to waste. You bet your bottom dollar your body's going to utilize it. And we have doubly labeled water studies where we actually radioisotope label leucine and amino acids coming in from protein to see that it's going to these places. So can we just get off this weird high horse of timing for a minute and just realize that maybe we're designed to just eat somewhat randomly and have protein, large amounts of protein at random sittings, and sometimes periods with no protein, because you're not going to lose your gains if you miss a protein meal. Next up is one that I've talked about a little bit before, and that's sweating. I believe that our ancestors sweat a lot. Even if you were in a cold climate, you were still probably covered up and sometimes sweating. And even though we're looking at cold climates there, let's realistically remember that a lot of our ancestors are probably living in warmer climates. And we've probably evolved over the years to really be able to sweat a lot. So what are the things that you can do? You can go in a sauna. You can go walk in the heat. You can cover multiple bases. You can ground, be barefoot, walk in the sun, in the heat, and break a sweat. Maybe you can even sprint. Sweating is something that we did ancestrally that I think a lot of us don't do. We don't sweat. We don't break a sweat. Now, sweat doesn't mean that you worked hard or not, right? You can sit in a sauna and be totally relaxed and still sweat. It's just something about using those glands to actually push out wasted material and just get a cleansing effect. Not to mention the heat shock proteins, the hormetic effect, and all the other things. The next one is biome swaps. What does that mean? Connection, community, touch, eating things off the ground. Okay, not saying that you need to go do that, but we took care of our biome, our skin biome, our lung biome, our microbiome, and our gut by just living, right? There was community, there was touch, there were certain elements of microbial transfer. You probably did eat things off the ground. You probably did connect with these different microbes. And all this thing is a natural balance within our body. Our world is so sterile. There are evidence-based models out of the Norwegian and I think the just Scandinavian countries, it might have been Sweden, where kids that play in the dirt have better immune systems, right? Being able to enrich our biome is important. And even the skin biome, like touch and connection, not to mention the emotional aspect and energetic aspect of connecting with people, right? The closest thing that we can do is we can eat fermented foods, right? That's probably very realistic what our ancestors would do. Okay, ferment things, get that biome effect. You can also, in today's modern age, you don't have to be a weirdo. You don't have to go eat stuff off the ground. You can actually take good probiotics. That can have an impact too, because these probiotics are designed to have this impact. Problem is, most of them are garbage. I linked out to the one that I use. It's literally the only probiotic I would recommend because I do think most of them are trash and full of filler materials and get broken down before they even get in your gut in the first place. The one below is Seed. That's a 25% off discount. Definitely recommend you try it. It's the one that I've been using. And quite frankly, it's the only one that has clinical evidence behind it and the only one that actually makes sense because it's a prebiotic and a probiotic in one. So it's more like what you would get if you were eating fermented food. The prebiotic effect and the probiotic effect. And with Seed, it's a multi-stage kind of delivery. So for me, it seems like from an ancestral perspective, it's probably the closest that we get to like getting the biome that we want. So anyway, 25% off. I linked out to them down below. Disclosure, they are a sponsor on this channel. They have been for a long time. I just think it makes sense because I use it to recommend it to people so that you can get the benefit too. So that link is in the top line of the description. Next is periodic carbohydrate restriction. Don't click off this video. Let me explain. Okay, carbohydrate restriction doesn't have to be going keto. It just means maybe an element of realism, right? There are periods of time when we will not be able to get carbohydrates in. There are periods of time when we might just get protein and fat, like in the winter when there's not berries, when there's not fruit. So our bodies have evolved and there's processes. There's upregulation of PGC1A and PPAR alpha and all these things that allow us to use proteins and fats better when we're deprived of carbohydrates. But then there's times like the spring and summer when we upregulate enzymes and GLUT4 translocation a little bit better and we can utilize that glucose, right? We can use those carbs. So the point is that we have periods of time when we don't have carbs and just randomly do that. Maybe go a week where you just don't have carbs or 3 days where you don't have carbs. You'll survive, I promise you. But then also, on that same vein, the next one is have periodic periods where you're low protein and just high carb. And when I say high carb, I mean like honey and fruit and things you would find in nature. So all these things I'm talking about so far, nothing that I've said yet would make you a weirdo. Most of the things that you could do, other people wouldn't even pick up on. Like if you were just like, yeah, I'm just eating meat. Like most people would be like, cool, why are you doing that? Like, feels good. Okay. Then if you ate a bunch of fruit, people would be like, hey, good on you, you're eating fruit. Like you go periods of time without eating. Some people might question, you say you're intermittent fasting. You don't have to be a freak, putting a weird vest on, pulling a sled. You don't have to do that. Like you can do that. You just don't have to be an ancestral weirdo. You can be a regular dude. I do these things. I'm not regular, but I'm a dude. And the point is that I don't claim to be this ancestral weirdo, but I do these things and you can do it too. And you'll probably feel really dang good. The next one is wild. So I was actually sent this originally by Paul Saladino, and then I looked into it more. There's interesting evidence on CO2, so sleeping indoors, okay, and breathing in a lot of CO2. So like our spouse, our kids, our dogs, whoever's in the same room, CO2 levels will rise significantly. And there is a direct correlation with high CO2 and poor sleep. So what's the solution to this? It's not to go sleep outside, it's to crack a dang window. So there's stronger evidence. I remember even Menno Henselmans had posted something about this, very evidence-based guy, that people tend to sleep better with the windows open. We're designed to get fresh air. At the end of the day, like the whole grounding thing I talked about, we're probably biologically built to sleep on the ground with fresh air. Like it or love it, we've become so disconnected with who we are as a human species that we forget that. So crack a window, maybe put a grounding pad on your bed if you really wanted to, or a grounding strap. At the very least, go outside and get some grounding before you go to bed for a couple of minutes. Let the dogs out to go to the bathroom and stand on the ground. Like, it's not that hard. And then you crack a window, get fresh air. Cool thing is this isn't just like an ego thing. Like, you're actually going to improve your life and probably sleep better. The next one is you have to bring your intensity of your workouts, lifting, whatever, to the brink of total failure and exhaustion for at least a few seconds. I think one of the things that our human ancestors did is they would fight to the very end, okay? And sometimes they'd win, sometimes they wouldn't. But the point is that you have these sympathetic pulses where you go all the way, right? Get that real serious intensity. Lift until you can't lift anymore. Just push yourself. We don't do that enough. But it doesn't have to be that much. It can be seconds. It doesn't need to be doing a CrossFit Metcon for 45 minutes till you throw up. It can be, I'm gonna go 20 seconds of all out effort a couple times per week. Just touch the edge, flirt with it. I promise you what it does for you hormonally, what it does for you enzymatically, what it does for you mentally will be worth it. And the last thing is, we would go parasympathetic. If you look at a gazelle, you look at a wild animal, they get chased by a predator, and when they make it to safety, they go right back to munching on grass like nothing ever happened. The reason is they don't have the brain development that humans have. We have this big giant prefrontal cortex that takes in all this information, takes thoughts and all this stuff, and manufactures a future for ourselves. Okay, realistically, you don't even have to go down a quantum physics rabbit hole like I have with this. The future doesn't really exist, right? It's all a projection of patterns and images and lights and all these things that we are seeing in this information sphere ultimately, right? So we're projecting what we think to be the future. The future doesn't actually exist. A lot of wild animals don't have the ability to think like that. They're not thinking about the future. They know what's right there. So they can go from sympathetic tone, fight or flight, right back to parasympathetic and relaxed. That's a lot to ask for a human, okay? You'd have to do a lot of work to get there. But what you can do is at least gamify it. When you have intensity, counter it with relaxation. When you have stress, counter it with something soothing. Make a concerted effort for that, because we as humans unfortunately have to gamify it, because it's not going to come to us innately because we have a thing called life. And that's the frustration that I have with the ancestral movement, is that it implies that everyone can just live that way. We all have jobs, we all have responsibilities, we have families. Okay? But what you can do is gamify all these things so that they're in your life seamlessly. And you're not a weirdo. You're not a weirdo for going to the gym and then saying, you know what, I want to go lay down for 20 minutes. You're not a weirdo for saying, that was a really stressful phone call. I need to just lay on my back on the floor for 5 minutes. Maybe you can't do that in your office, but you can find a way. The point is, where there's a will, there's a way. And all these things are practical and will not make you a weirdo. I'll see you tomorrow.